Hey guys, Dr. Chris Dost here. Welcome back to my channel, Biblical Languages and Literature. I'm really excited about this new series, as this series of videos accompanies the new Hebrew grammar that I'm writing. So how is this Biblical Hebrew manual different from the other ones that are out there? Well, first, we're going to get into the Masorah. The Masorah is a system of quality control that was inserted into certain biblical manuscripts in the Middle Ages to help ensure that the Bible, the Hebrew Bible, would be transmitted accurately. These issues are typically not dealt with in elementary level biblical Hebrew grammars. The second thing we're going to get into is the cantillation system or the accent system. Most biblical Hebrew students in their first year never really learn to use the cantillation system or the accent system in reading and interpreting the Hebrew Bible. This manual is going to teach you how to do that. Finally, each chapter has an exegetical insight in which I demonstrate how you can use what you're learning to better interpret the Hebrew Bible. Before we get started, please be sure to subscribe to the channel, ring the bell, and click the like. With the foundation laid, let's get into Chapter 1, which deals with the alphabet. So first, we've got some preliminary considerations. So ancient Hebrew, like many other members of the Semitic language family, used and eventually adapted the Phoenician alphabetic script, which reads from right to left. Many of my young students ask me, when first presented with the Hebrew alphabet and they learn that it reads right to left, they ask, why does Hebrew read backwards? And my response, of course, is that it doesn't. It's English that's backwards. One of the things we need to understand about the Phoenician alphabet, which was adopted by Hebrew and Aramaic, is that it only includes consonants. Readers of these ancient texts were expected to supply the vowels from the context. And so over the course of the period during which the Hebrew Bible was written, the writing of Hebrew evolved, changing to increasingly allow for certain consonants to be used as vowel indicators as well. Generally speaking, however, Hebrew writing did not contain vowel symbols. Not until the Middle Ages. Now, the thought of attempting to read a text lacking vowels may sound daunting, if not altogether frightening. It is not as difficult as it may seem presently. Once one acquires a vocabulary store, a mastery of basic grammatical concepts, and learns to pay careful attention to context, it is much easier to properly interpret vowelless texts than one might initially think. So to illustrate, let's try to decipher the following English sentence. And I suspect that it won't take you terribly long to figure out what this means. I'll give you a second. So were you able to figure it out? As you may have discovered, your native level knowledge of English vocabulary has allowed for you to immediately decipher the following three vowelless words, as there's no other choice in the English language for these than the words introduction, Hebrew, and language. The answer that you should have come up with is, this book is an introduction to the Hebrew language. Such is the case with Hebrew. To be sure, there are plenty of opportunities for confusion when vowels are not present. For instance, the Hebrew word that uses these three consonants, which correspond right to left as M, L, and K, can mean king, in which case it would be pronounced melech, and he reigned, a verb, pronounced malach, but it all depends on which vowels are supplied by the reader. Most of the time, the precise meaning is clear from the context. All right, now let's take a minute to talk about the pronunciation system used in this book. I've chosen to use the modern Israeli system, which virtually all contemporary scholars employ, not the ancient pronunciation system of the biblical period, which would have been the late 2nd millennium BCE through the late 1st millennium BCE, nor do I use the medieval Tiberian Masoretic system, even though that's the one that is documented and employed in virtually every printed edition of the Hebrew Bible. Biblical scholars need to fully understand the Tiberian system because it's the one reflected in the Masoretic text, which is the text on which virtually every modern translation of the Old Testament or the Hebrew Bible is based. However, the Tiberian pronunciation system is very different from the more ancient pronunciations that were in use during the periods during which the Bible was written. And it's therefore an obstacle to understanding the Hebrew Bible texts as they were meant to be read and heard. Now, furthermore, there never was one authoritative pronunciation of Hebrew in ancient times. Spoken ancient Hebrew differed from region to region, if not from village to village, partly because, even in its earliest days, Israel interacted with various people groups and often exchanged control of territories with those who spoke a different form of the language or another Semitic language altogether. This was very common in the north, actually, where Aram, where Aramaic was spoken, and Israel kept making incursions into each other's land. And it's no surprise that the Hebrew of the north actually looks and sounds a lot more like Aramaic than does the Hebrew of Jerusalem in the south. But we get a small glimpse into the complexity of early Hebrew in Judges chapter 12, verses 5 through 6, where we find that Gilead captured the fords of the Jordan against Ephraim. Now, when one of the fugitives of Ephraim would say, "Let me pass," the men of Gilead would say to him, "You are Ephraimite." But he would say, "No." So they would say to him, "Say Shibboleth." But he would say Sibboleth, for he could not pronounce this. So they would take him away and unalive him at the fords of the Jordan. And from Ephraim there fell at that time 42,000. Now we learn from this passage that even in nearby regions, a person's place of origin was immediately evident from his or her pronunciation of Hebrew. The same is true with modern Palestinian Arabic. In villages that are a short car ride from one another, certain words are pronounced differently, and in some cases the pronunciation is drastically different. But the point that I wish to establish is that Hebrew, like English, evolved over time, and that process did not happen uniformly. Please keep in mind that the pronunciations for each of these graphemes, or written symbols, that we are learning apply when these graphemes function as consonants. This is an important consideration because a few of these graphemes sometimes function as vowel marks, as we'll find out below. All right, so the first letter is Aleph. Aleph. And this is a silent consonant. It has no pronunciation, which is why I've written NA, where it says English equivalent. Sometimes you'll see that Aleph is represented by an apostrophe, and while it did initially have a pronunciation, as we'll see below, in the modern Israeli pronunciation system, Aleph is not pronounced. Next we have Beit. Beit. And this makes two sounds, B as in boy, and V or V as in very. Now, if you've learned some Hebrew before, perhaps you've encountered a book that has taught you that when the Beit is pronounced with a V sound, like in very, the name of the letter is actually Vet. This is not really true, though, historically. These are just two pronunciations, two realizations of the same letter. All right, next we have Gimel. Gimel, which makes the G sound like in game. Then there's Dalet. Dalet, which makes the D sound as in door. He makes the H sound like in happy. Vav makes the V sound like in very. So yes, just like in English, so also in Hebrew, we sometimes have more than one letter making the same sound. After that, we have Zion, which makes the Z like in zebra. After that is Chet, for which we have no English equivalent. And so in the book, the words that I put in there are chutzpah, a Yiddish word, and Chanukah. After that is Tet, which makes a T sound, like in the word toy, followed by Yud, which makes the Y sound, like in yellow. After that is Kaf, which makes the K sound, as in kick, but only when it has the dot inside it. We're going to call this dot dagesh. We'll get into that later. But if Kaf has a dot or a dagesh inside it, it makes the K sound. If it does not, it makes the Ch sound like in chutzpah and Chanukah. Now you'll also note that with Kaf, there is a final form of this letter. When Kaf comes at the end of a word, it takes a different shape. And when the final form appears, it will be pronounced Ch, Ch. Kaf is followed by Lamed, which makes an L sound like in lion. And then we have Mem, which makes an M sound like in the word man. And like Kaf, Mem also has a final form. When Mem comes at the end of a word, it changes its shape. It's a different grapheme, we would say. This is followed by Nun, which has its own final form as well. Nun makes the N sound, like in the word name. That's then followed by Samech, which makes an S sound, as in same. Then we have Ayin, which, like Aleph, is a silent consonant. It doesn't make a sound in the modern Israeli pronunciation system. Many times Ayin will be represented in transcription when we Latinize the Hebrew with a backwards apostrophe. After that, we have Pe, which makes the P sound, like in pond, but only when it has a dagesh inside it. When it does not have a dagesh, it's pronounced as an F or a PH. Some people transcribe it as. We'll use an F, like in the word fond. Pe also has a final form, and when pe comes at the end of a word, it makes the F sound. After that, we have tzade, which makes a TS sound, like at the end of the word betz. And tzade also has a final form. After that is kuf, which in the modern Israeli pronunciation system makes a K, just like kaf. This would have been pronounced differently in ancient times. In Arabic, this letter is pronounced in the throat, qa, as opposed to k. But in the modern Israeli pronunciation of Hebrew, it'll be pronounced as a K, like in kick. Then we have resh after that, which in the Israeli pronunciation is more like a French R, r. After that, we have shin, which makes the SH sound, like in the word shame. And that's followed by sin, which makes an S sound, like in same. Now, technically, shin and sin are the same letter. In ancient Hebrew, they did not have these dots over them. You notice that when it's shin, we put a dot to the right. When it's sin, we put a dot to the left. In ancient times, there were no dots. There were no diacritical marks. And the reader would have had to know how to pronounce it. And then finally, we have tav, which makes a T sound, like in toy. So let's discuss the alphabet a little bit. There's 4 important aspects of the Hebrew alphabet that we need to consider. First, while most consonantal graphemes... Thanks so much for watching this video. If you want to watch the entire unabridged video and gain access to the manual as I'm writing it, please be sure to become a subscriber on my Patreon channel. The link is in the description down below. See you next time, everybody.